The sun hung low over the vast African savanna, casting long shadows across the golden grasslands of the Masai Mara. Towering acacia trees dotted the landscape like ancient sentinels, their flat tops swaying gently in the warm breeze. This was a place of raw beauty and unrelenting survival, where the circle of life played out in every rustle of grass and distant roar. Among the herds of zebras and wildebeest roamed a family of giraffes, their elegant necks stretching high to nibble on the tender leaves just out of reach for lesser creatures. Lila, the mother giraffe, moved with the graceful certainty of one who had navigated these plains for years. Her coat, a patchwork of tawny and white, gleamed under the fading light. She was heavy with child now, her belly swollen and round, a promise of new life that made her steps more deliberate. Beside her trotted her firstborn, a young female they called Mira, barely a year old, but already towering over the smaller antelope that scattered at their approach. Mira's legs were long and spindly, her spots still soft and undefined, marking her as the vulnerable heart of their small herd. Lila's mate had been lost to a lion pride months earlier, leaving the two to fend for themselves, relying on Lila's keen instincts and Mira's budding curiosity. The day had been typical: grazing in the morning, a slow migration toward the river as the heat peaked. Lila led the way, her head held high, ears flicking at the sounds of the wild. Mira stayed close, occasionally bumping her mother's flank in playful affection, her wide eyes taking in the world with innocent wonder. The savanna teemed with life. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their calls a symphony overhead, while in the distance a pride of lions lounged in the shade, too sated from a recent kill to pose an immediate threat. But danger here was never far. It lurked in the dry riverbeds, the hidden sinkholes, and the deceptive calm of the wetlands. As the afternoon wore on, Lila sensed the shift in the air, a subtle dampness that hinted at the nearby bog. The giraffes needed water, and the river's edge was just beyond a stretch of what looked like firm ground, dotted with tall grasses. Lila paused, her nostrils flaring as she tested the wind. Mira nudged her impatiently, letting out a soft, bleating call that echoed like a child's plea. With a reassuring glance down at her daughter, Lila stepped forward, her hooves sinking slightly into the softer earth. It felt yielding but not alarming. Many paths in the Mara tested like this after the rains. Mira followed eagerly, her longer strides matching her mother's. The ground grew muddier, the grasses thicker, hiding the treacherous underbelly. Lila's weight pressed down, and suddenly her front legs buckled. A wet, sucking sound rose from beneath as the earth gave way. Not solid soil, but quicksand, a hidden trap formed from the recent floods that had turned this dry patch into a deadly mire. Panic flickered in Lila's dark eyes. She tried to pull back, but her massive body only sank deeper. The mud climbing her legs like a living thing, cold and unrelenting. Mira skidded to a halt at the edge, her thin frame trembling as she watched her mother struggle. Lila twisted her neck, letting out a deep, rumbling bellow that vibrated through the air, a mother's desperate cry for escape. The quicksand pulled greedily, now up to her knees, the weight of her pregnancy making every movement sluggish. She stretched her neck toward a nearby acacia branch, but it was just out of reach, taunting her with salvation. Mira paced frantically, her hooves dancing on the solid ground, unsure what to do. The baby giraffe's instincts screamed at her to flee, but the bond with her mother held her fast. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lila sank further. The mud was now at her belly, pressing against the unborn calf inside her, a cruel irony in this place of birth and death. She called again, her voice hoarse, echoing across the empty plain. Mira responded with a high-pitched wail, a sound so raw and heartbreaking it seemed to pierce the very heart of the savanna. The little giraffe circled the edge of the pit, her legs splashing in the shallow fringes, trying to find a way closer without joining her mother. Tears, real, glistening trails, streaked down Mira's face, her cries growing more frantic, a symphony of fear and loss that carried on the wind. In the distance, the sounds of the herd faded, the other animals sensing the peril and keeping their distance. Quicksand was a silent killer here, claiming the unwary without mercy. Lila's struggles weakened. The more she thrashed, the faster she sank. Her elegant form now half submerged, the mud bubbling around her like a grave. Mira refused to leave, pressing her muzzle against the air as if she could will her mother free. The baby's cries intensified, a relentless plea that seemed to summon the spirits of the wild itself. Hours passed in this agonizing tableau, the light failing as night crept in, stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. Deep in the bush, unseen eyes turned toward the commotion. A lone bull-elephant, scarred from battles past, lumbered through the undergrowth, his massive ears flapping against the cooling air. He had heard the cries. Giraffe calls were unmistakable, laced with urgency. Elephants, with their ancient wisdom and communal memory, knew the savannah's secrets, including the bogs that swallowed the unwary. But would he intervene? The bull paused, trunk raised, sensing the desperation in the air. Mira's voice cracked with exhaustion, her small body heaving as she continued her vigil. Lila's eyes met her daughter's, a silent transmission of love and apology in that final sinking moment. The mud reached her chest now, the weight unbearable. Just as hope seemed to ebb away, the elephant's trumpet shattered the night, a deep, resonant call that promised change. Mira's head whipped around, her cries pausing in bewildered hope. The miracle was stirring, but in the wild, salvation came with its own perils. The bull-elephant approached, his shadow falling long across the mire, trunk probing the edge as he assessed the scene. Would he risk the quicksand to save them? The savannah held its breath. The bull-elephant's approach was a thunderous rhythm against the savannah's hush, his enormous feet crunching the dry grass like brittle bones underfoot. His name, if elephants named themselves, might have been Quito, scarred across his broad forehead from a long-ago clash with a rival. And he carried the weight of years in his slow, deliberate gait. The air around him hummed with the scent of dust and wild sage, his trunk swaying like a living pendulum as he crested the low rise overlooking the bog. The giraffe's cries had drawn him from his solitary wanderings. In the elephant clans, such sounds were beacons, pulling at the threads of memory that bound their kind to the land's fragile balance. Mira froze, her spindly legs locking in place as the massive shadow loomed larger. Her wide eyes, still rimmed with the damp trails of her tears, reflected the elephant's silhouette against the star-pricked sky. Lila, half buried in the quicksand's greedy embrace, lifted her head with what strength remained, her neck straining upward. The mud clung to her like a second skin, cold and viscous, squeezing the life from her swollen belly where the unborn calf shifted weakly in response to her distress. The elephant's trumpet echoed again, softer this time, a probing call that cut through Mira's whimpers like a lifeline tossed into the dark. Quito halted at the bog's edge, his trunk extending tentatively, nostrils flaring to taste the danger. Quicksand was no stranger to him. He'd seen it claim zebras and buffalo in his youth, watched as the earth swallowed them whole without remorse. But this was different, a mother and her young, the female heavy with life, her struggles stirring something primal in his ancient heart. Elephants remembered. They carried the stories of the herd in their low rumbles and trunk touches, tales of pulling kin from floods or mudslides with sheer might and cunning. He circled the perimeter slowly, his tusks glinting in the moonlight, testing the ground with his weight. The mire bubbled faintly where Lila shifted, her breaths coming in ragged gasps, each one a battle against the sinking pull. Mira took a hesitant step forward, her bleats turning from despair to a mix of hope and fear. She didn't know this giant beast, but his presence filled the void of her isolation, a towering force amid the night's chill. The baby giraffe's coat was matted with sweat and dust, her ossicones, those small horn-like knobs on her head, quivering as she watched Quito. He paused, his small eyes locking onto hers, and let out a low, reassuring rumble that vibrated through the ground. It was the sound of the earth itself speaking, calming the wild panic in her veins. Mira responded instinctively, her head dipping in a gesture of trust, though her body trembled. With a decisive huff, Quito extended his trunk toward Lila. It was thick as a python, flexible and strong, curling through the air to bridge the gap. Lila strained, her neck arching painfully to meet it, lips parting in a desperate nuzzle. The connection was tenuous at first, the trunk's tip brushing her muzzle, then gripping with surprising gentleness. Quito braced his hind legs, muscles rippling under his wrinkled grey hide, and began to pull. The mud resisted with a wet, slurping protest, Lila's body inching upward by fractions that felt like eternities. Mira danced closer, her cries urging them on, a chorus of encouragement that spurred the elephant's efforts. But the quicksand fought back. Lila's weight, amplified by the pregnancy and the mire's suction, tested even Quito's formidable strength. He dug his toes into the firm earth, trunk straining as veins bulged along its length. Lila's front legs emerged slightly, hooves scraping free, but the mud reclaimed them almost immediately, dragging her deeper. A fresh wave of panic washed over her. She bellowed, the sound raw and piercing, echoing across the plains where distant hyenas yipped in response. Drawn by the commotion, but wary of the elephant's dominance, Mira pressed against the edge, her own hooves slipping into the shallows, but she didn't care. Her mother's plight was a tether, pulling her toward recklessness. Quito paused, releasing the grip to reassess. Sweat glistened on his flanks, his ears flapping to cool the exertion. He trumpeted sharply, a call that summoned the night winds, then lumbered to a nearby acacia, its branches low and sturdy. With his trunk, he wrapped around a thick limb, testing its hold before snapping it free with a crack that split the silence. The branch, long and forked, became his tool, a makeshift lever born of savanna ingenuity. Returning to the bog, he positioned himself carefully, sliding the branch toward Lila like an offering. She grasped it between her teeth, the wood bitter against her tongue, while Quito anchored the other end under his foot and pulled once more. The combined effort yielded ground. Inch by agonizing inch, Lila's chest cleared the surface, the mud relinquishing its hold with reluctant gurgles. Mira's cries shifted to triumphant squeals, her body leaping in place as hope reignited. The unborn calf inside Lila kicked faintly, a spark of life affirming the struggle's worth. But peril lingered. The quicksand's edge was unstable, and Quito's massive form risked tipping the balance. A low rumble from the elephant warned Mira to stay back as he heaved again, his body a monument of endurance against the wild's indifference. As the moon climbed higher, casting silver light over the scene, Lila's hindquarters began to emerge. The mud slid from her flanks in heavy clumps, revealing the taut skin of her belly, marked by the faint outlines of her pregnancy. Exhaustion clawed at them all. Quito's breaths labored, Mira's voice hoarse. But the miracle unfolded in slow motion, a testament to the unlikely alliances forged in desperation. Yet, as Lila neared freedom, a new shadow stirred on the horizon. The faint glow of headlights piercing the darkness, unnatural in this realm of beasts. Rangers from the Mara Reserve, patrolling the night, had heard the distant calls and were closing in. Their arrival could save or complicate, for humans in the savannah brought rules and rescues of their own. Quito sensed them first, his ears pivoting toward the rumble of engines. He redoubled his efforts, urgency fueling his pull as Lila's legs finally touched semi-solid ground. She collapsed forward, trembling, Mira rushing to nuzzle her side in a flood of relief. The mother giraffe licked her daughter's face, a gesture of survival's sweet victory, while the elephant stepped back, trunk raised in quiet satisfaction. But the night wasn't over. The approaching lights promised intervention, and in the wild, even miracles came with uncertainties. The savannah whispered on, its secrets unfolding under the watchful stars. The headlights cut through the inky blackness like accusatory fingers, bouncing over the uneven terrain as the ranger's jeep rumbled closer. Dust billowed in their wake, a gritty haze that caught in the acacia thorns and swirled around the exhausted trio at the bog's edge. Lila lay panting on the firm ground, her massive chest heaving with each labored breath, the mud caking her coat in thick, drying clumps that cracked like parched earth. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak from the ordeal, but she managed to curl her neck protectively around Mira, who pressed close, her small body still quivering from the night's terror. The baby giraffe's muzzle nuzzled into her mother's flank, drawing comfort from the familiar warmth, even as the scent of quicksand, dank and mineral sharp, clung to them both. Quito stood a short distance away, his colossal frame silhouetted against the moonlit savannah, trunk dangling loosely as he recovered his breath. The elephant's sides glistened with sweat, his scarred hide etched deeper by the shadows, and he let out a low, rumbling huff that resonated like distant thunder. He'd seen humans before, tourists with their clicking cameras, poachers with their silent menace. But these lights felt different, purposeful. His ears flared wide, catching the growl of the engine and the faint voices carried on the wind. Urgent clipped words in Swahili laced with English, rangers from the Mara patrolling for snares or stragglers after dark. Quito shifted his weight, tusks gleaming faintly, debating whether to melt back into the bush or stand his ground. Elephants were wanderers, not beggars for aid, but the giraffe mother's labored groans tugged at his instincts, a reminder of the herds he'd once protected. The jeep skidded to a halt 20 yards from the mire, its tires churning up clods of soil. Two men leaped out, their silhouettes lean and efficient in khaki uniforms, flashlights sweeping the scene like searchlights. The first, a wiry Kenyan named Juma, with a radio crackling at his belt, froze mid-step, his beam locking onto the mud-smeared forms. "Bwana, look at this," he muttered to his partner, Elias, a stockier man from Nairobi, whose face creased in disbelief. They'd responded to reports of unusual animal calls over the radio, poachers or a kill, they'd thought. But this was something out of a documentary. Lila's eyes, wide and wary, met the light's glare. She tensed, ready to rise despite her exhaustion, her protective instincts flaring at the intrusion. "Easy now," Elias called softly, his voice steady as he raised empty hands. He knew giraffes, graceful but skittish, especially a cow in distress. Mira bleated sharply, shrinking closer to Lila, her spindly legs folding beneath her in fear. The baby giraffe's heart pounded visibly under her thin hide, the adrenaline from the rescue giving way to this new uncertainty. Juma circled cautiously, his flashlight playing over the quicksand's deceptive surface, now still and innocent in the aftermath. Quicksand got her good, and that elephant. He pulled her out? Elias nodded, piecing it together from the dragged branches and the elephant's proximity. Stories like this circulated in the ranger camps, unlikely animal alliances, but witnessing it firsthand stirred a quiet awe. Quito trumpeted once, a warning that vibrated through the ground, sending a flock of nightjars scattering from nearby bushes. The rangers held their ground, Elias murmuring soothing words in Ma, the Maasai tongue that blended with the land's rhythm. He pulled a flare from the jeep's kit, popping it skyward to signal any backup, its red glow bathing the scene in an eerie crimson light. Lila struggled to her feet, her swollen belly swaying as she tested her balance, the unborn calf inside her kicking faintly. a sign of resilience amid the chaos. Mira rose with her, pressing against Lila's side, their necks entwining in a silent vow of unity. The mud sucked at their hooves as they backed away from the bog, toward the safety of the open grass, but Lila's steps faltered, pain shooting through her limbs from the strain. "We need to get her to the vet station," Juma said, grabbing the radio. "She's pregnant, could go into labor from the stress." Elias agreed, but approaching a wild giraffe wasn't simple. They carried no tranquilizers on night patrol, only basics for emergencies. He rummaged in the jeep for water and a blanket, improvising a makeshift shelter from the wind. Quito watched, his trunk curling thoughtfully, then lumbered a step closer, as if assessing these interlopers. The elephant's presence was both boon and risk. His size could ward off scavengers, but spook the giraffes into bolting prematurely. As the rangers edged nearer, Lila lowered her head, ears flicking back in agitation. Mira's cries started up again, softer now, a plaintive whine that tugged at the men's hearts. Elias knelt slowly, pouring water into a shallow depression in the dirt, the liquid glinting invitingly. "Come on, Mama," he whispered. "We've got you." Lila hesitated, her tongue flicking out to taste the air, the thirst burning in her throat after hours of struggle. Mira nudged her forward, curiosity overriding fear, and together they approached the puddle, lapping tentatively. The contact was electric, a bridge between worlds, human hands steadying the moment. But the night held more trials. In the distance, hyenas cackled, their opportunistic yips growing bolder as the scent of vulnerability carried on the breeze. Quito swung his head toward the sound, trunk raised like a sentinel, his low growl scattering the shadows. Juma scanned with his light, spotting the yellow eyes glinting from the grass. "We can't leave them here," he said urgently. "Load up the jeep. We'll escort them to the river track." Elias nodded, starting the engine with a cough that made Mira startle. The rangers moved in tandem, one guiding the giraffes with gentle calls, the other keeping watch for predators. Lila followed the water's promise, her pace slow but determined, Mira at her heels. Quito trailed behind, a guardian in the gloom, his footsteps a reassuring drumbeat. The jeep crept alongside, headlights dimmed to avoid blinding them, illuminating the path through the tall grasses that whispered secrets to the wind. The savannah stretched endlessly, a tapestry of survival where miracles like this one were rare threads of hope. As they moved, Lila felt a sharp twinge in her belly, not just fatigue, but the first hints of labor stirring, accelerated by the ordeal. Mira sensed it too, her bleats turning anxious once more. Dawn's first light crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds as the group neared the ranger outpost. The unborn calf's arrival loomed, a new chapter in this tale of endurance. But with humans now woven into the narrative, the wild's rules bent, promising aid, yet demanding trust. The giraffes paused at the river's edge, the water's murmur a balm, while Quito stood watch, the savannah awakening around them in a symphony of life renewed. Tension lingered in the air, the hyena's echoes fading. But the bond forged in the night held firm, a fragile alliance against the unforgiving wild. The first rays of dawn filtered through the acacia canopy, turning the river's surface into a shimmering ribbon of gold that snaked through the awakening savannah. Lila stood at the water's edge, her long legs braced against the soft bank, the cool mud soothing her aching hooves after the night's harrowing escape. The quicksand's residue still clung to her coat in stubborn patches, flaking off as she shifted her weight, but the deeper ache came from within, contractions rippling through her swollen belly like distant thunder rolling across the plains. She lowered her head to drink, the water's freshness a brief respite, her tongue curling around the liquid with deliberate sips. Mira hovered close, her own thirst quenched, but her eyes darting nervously between her mother and the rumbling jeep that idled a respectful distance away. Elias and Juma had pulled the vehicle to a stop near the outpost's weathered fence, a simple chain-link barrier dotted with warning signs in Swahili and English. The station was a modest cluster of thatched roof buildings, home to a handful of rangers and a small veterinary clinic stocked for emergencies like this. Smoke curled from a cook fire outside, where an early-rising colleague stirred a pot of ugali, the maize porridge's earthy aroma mingling with the river's damp scent. Elias hopped out, grabbing a satellite phone from the dash, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Call Dr. Nyoroge," he told Juma, who was already dialing. "Tell her we've got a giraffe in labor, stress-induced, possible complications from a bog entrapment." Quito lingered at the tree line, his massive form half hidden in the dappled shadows, trunk idly stripping leaves from a low branch as he kept vigil. The elephant's presence was a quiet anchor, his low rumbles vibrating through the ground like a subsonic reassurance to the giraffes. He'd followed them the last mile, unhurried but steadfast, as if the night's bond demanded his watch. Hyenas had slunk away at his approach earlier, their cackles silenced by the weight of his shadow, but the savannah never slept fully. Birds now chattered overhead, vultures wheeling lazily in the warming sky, drawn by the scent of exhaustion and potential frailty. Lila's breaths grew shallower, her flanks heaving as another contraction gripped her. She let out a deep, guttural moan that echoed over the water, her neck arching in discomfort. Mira responded instantly, circling her mother with anxious steps, her muzzle bumping against Lila's side in instinctive comfort. The baby giraffe's own coat was streaked with mud and dew, her ossicones catching the light as she tossed her head, bleating softly, a sound that carried the raw edge of worry far beyond her years. The river lapped gently at their hooves, but peace was fleeting. Lila's body tensed again, the unborn calf pressing downward with urgent insistence. From the outpost, Dr. Amina Njoroge emerged, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a stethoscope draped around her neck and a medical kit slung over her shoulder. She'd been roused from a fitful sleep by the urgent call, her dark hair tied back in a practical braid, khaki pants tucked into sturdy boots. Years in the Mara had hardened her to the wild's cruelties, poaching raids, drought-stricken herds, but moments like this reignited her passion for the fragile line between life and loss. "Where is she?" Amina asked, striding toward the river with Elias at her side. Juma stayed back, radio in hand, coordinating with the reserve's headquarters for aerial support if needed. The group approached slowly, Amina's steps measured to avoid startling the animals. Leela's eyes locked onto the newcomers, ears pinning back as she assessed the threat. Mira positioned herself between her mother and the humans, her thin frame quivering but unyielding, a fierce little guardian in the face of the unknown. "She's close," Amina murmured, halting at a safe distance. She knelt, pulling binoculars from her kit to observe without intrusion. The giraffe's tail flicked erratically, a telltale sign, and her hind legs splayed slightly, preparing for the inevitable. The stress from the quicksand could cause distress to the calf. "We might need to intervene if she can't deliver naturally." Elias nodded, his face etched with concern. He'd grown up in these parts, son of a Maasai herder, and knew the rhythms of the wild intimately, the way a mother's labor could turn fatal in the open, exposed to predators or exhaustion. "The elephant's been with them since the bog, pulled her out himself, from what we saw." Amina glanced at Quito, her expression softening with rare wonder. Elephants were known for their empathy, trunk-to-trunk communications passing stories across generations, but this was a cross-species mercy that bordered on the miraculous. The bull shifted, his trunk curling in acknowledgement, as if sensing the doctor's gaze. Another contraction hit Lila like a wave crashing against the riverbank, her body shuddering as she braced against a sturdy acacia trunk. The bark scraped her hide, grounding her amid the pain, and she pushed, muscles straining in a primal effort. Mira pressed closer, her warmth a counter to the chill of dawn, licking at her mother's neck with gentle swipes of her tongue. The bleats from the baby grew more insistent, a soundtrack to the unfolding drama that tugged at the rangers' hearts. Amina whispered encouragements in Swahili, her voice blending with the morning chorus of weaver birds and distant impala calls. Minutes stretched into an eternity of tension. Lila's efforts intensified, her moans deepening into bellows that scattered a nearby troop of baboons. Then, with a final Herculean push, the calf emerged, slippery and spindly, sliding onto the riverbank in a rush of fluid and afterbirth. It was a male, tiny even by giraffe standards, his legs folding awkwardly beneath him as he lay still for a heart-stopping moment. Lila turned immediately, her neck curving to nuzzle the newborn, licking him clean with broad strokes that revealed his fresh, spotted coat. Mira crowded in, her curiosity blooming into joyful nudges, the family's circle complete against the savannah's vast indifference. But joy was tempered by fragility. The calf struggled to rise, his legs wobbling like reeds in the wind, while Quito trumpeted softly from afar, a celebration laced with caution. Amina watched intently, noting the umbilical cord's healthy snap and the calf's first weak attempts to stand. "He's breathing," she said, relief flooding her voice, "but he'll need monitoring. Dehydration from the mud ordeal could weaken him." The rangers set up a perimeter with flares and a portable fence from the outpost stores, creating a safe haven while giving the family space. Lila coaxed her son upright, his head bobbing as he found his footing, the first rays warming his damp skin. As the sun climbed higher, casting a golden halo over the scene, the outpost buzzed with quiet activity. Juma radioed in the good news, his words crackling over the line to cheers from headquarters. Quito wandered closer, his trunk extending to touch the calf's flank in a gentle greeting, the elephant's wisdom affirming the new life's place in the herd. Mira danced around her brother, her earlier cries forgotten in this burst of renewal. Yet, the savannah whispered warnings, lions stirred in the heat, and the quicksand shadow lingered in Lila's weary eyes. The miracle of the night had birthed another, but survival demanded vigilance, the wild's embrace both tender and unforgiving. The river flowed on, carrying their story downstream into the endless cycle. The sun crested fully over the Masai Mara, bathing the riverbank in a warm, insistent light that chased away the last vestiges of night. Lila watched her newborn son with unwavering focus, her dark eyes soft yet vigilant as he teetered on his fragile legs. The calf, whom she instinctively knew would one day bear the strength of the plains, wobbled forward, his head dipping low to nuzzle at her underbelly. His first attempts to nurse were clumsy, lips questing blindly against her warm hide, but when he finally latched on, a quiet contentment settled over Lila. The milk flowed steadily, rich with the nutrients of survival, and the little one's suckling sounds mingled with the river's gentle rush, a fragile harmony in the awakening savannah. Mira circled them both, her earlier protectiveness evolving into playful curiosity. She extended her neck to sniff at her brother's damp coat, the spots on his hide mirroring her own, but fresher, unmarked by the world's harsh lessons. A soft bleat escaped her, not of fear now, but of wonder, as if the miracle of the bog had doubled in this new life. Lila nudged Mira gently with her muzzle, drawing her into the fold, the family's bond reknitting stronger than before. Yet exhaustion tugged at Lila's limbs. The quicksand's grip had sapped her reserves, and the labor, though swift, had left her flanks quivering. She shifted her weight, hooves sinking slightly into the soft earth, and let out a low rumble, a mother's sigh of relief laced with the weight of what lay ahead. From the outpost, Dr. Amina Njoroge observed through her binoculars, her breath steady despite the adrenaline still humming in her veins. The calf's first feed was a good sign. Vital, in fact, as colostrum carried the antibodies that could shield him from the savannah's myriad threats. But Amina's years as a wildlife vet had taught her caution. Premature births in giraffes often meant weak lungs or unsteady coordination, and the mud ordeal could have introduced infections. She lowered the lenses, turning to Elias, who stood beside her with a thermos of strong tea steaming in the cool morning air. "He's nursing well, but we need to keep watch. Predators will smell the afterbirth soon." Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where the grasslands rolled out like an endless sea of gold. The scent would draw lions or leopards, opportunistic hunters who viewed vulnerability as invitation. Quito, the bull elephant, had retreated to the shade of a cluster of fever trees, their yellow bark glowing in the sunlight. He stripped a branch with his trunk, chewing methodically, the fibrous leaves crunching between massive molars. His role in the night's drama lingered in his demeanor, a subtle vigilance as he positioned himself upwind, his bulk a deterrent to any shadows stirring in the bush. Elephants like him carried the herd's collective memory. He'd lost kin to bogs and floods, pulled others to safety with the same unyielding strength. Now, watching the giraffe family, he felt an echo of that ancient empathy, a rumble building in his chest that he released as a soft infrasound, inaudible to humans, but a comforting vibration to the animals nearby. Juma emerged from the outpost with a portable camera, its lens whirring softly as he documented the scene for the reserve's records. "This one's going viral," he murmured to Amina, a rare grin cracking his serious facade. Stories of animal rescues spread like wildfire through the camps and online forums, drawing tourists and funding for patrols. But practicality overrode sentiment. He set up a motion sensor alert near the riverbank, its beeps programmed to summon the team if the giraffes strayed too far. The outpost's solar panels hummed faintly, powering the equipment that bridged the wild with the world beyond. As the morning progressed, the calf, let's call him Ruto, for the river that had witnessed his birth, gained confidence. His legs, though spindly as reeds, held firmer with each attempt to stand tall. He took his first tentative steps away from Lila, bumping into Mira, who responded with a gentle head toss, guiding him back. The siblings' play was tentative at first, a nuzzle here, a sidestep there, but it built the foundation of their world. Lila grazed sparingly on the low acacias nearby, her neck stretching to reach the tender shoots, the act restorative even as her ears flicked at every rustle in the grass. The afterbirth, partially consumed by her to mask the scent, lay hidden under a pile of leaves she'd nudged over it, a maternal instinct honed by evolution. Trouble brewed subtly at first. A distant lioness's cough carried on the breeze, low and probing, answered by the faint waft of her pride rousing from a midday nap under a thorn bush. The savannah's predators operated on instinct, and the night's cries had marked this spot as potential weakness. Quito sensed it immediately, his trunk rising to test the air, tusks shifting as he lumbered a step closer to the river. Lila's head snapped up, her body tensing, and she positioned herself between her young and the open plain, her swollen teats still dripping from Ruto's feeding. Mira bleated in alarm, herding her brother behind Lila's legs, the family's unity a shield against the encroaching threat. Amina caught the shift too, her radio crackling to life with a scout's report, a pride of 5, including cubs, heading their way from the southeast. "We can't let them get too close," she said, signaling Elias to ready the jeep. They'd use noise and lights to deter, a non-lethal method that preserved the wild's balance. The doctor approached cautiously, her voice a steady murmur in Swahili, carrying fruits from the outpost stores, mangoes and bananas scavenged from nearby villages, as an offering to encourage the giraffes to move towards safer ground. Leela eyed her warily, but accepted a piece, the sweetness a novel comfort amid the tension. The lions appeared as golden blurs in the heat haze, stalking low through the tall grass, their manes ragged from recent scraps. The lead female paused, ears pricked at Quito's warning trumpet, a blast that shook the leaves and sent birds exploding skyward. The pride hesitated, weighing the risk of the elephant's might against the easy meal. Leela seized the moment, urging Mira and Ruto toward a denser thicket by the river's bend, her strides long but careful to match the calf's unsteady gait. Ruto stumbled once, his knees buckling into the dirt, but Mira was there, nudging him up with insistent affection. The family's progress was slow, a poignant procession under the climbing sun. Elias fired a warning shot into the air from the jeep, the crack echoing like thunder, scattering the lions into retreat. They slunk away, grumbling, their hunger denied but not forgotten. Quito followed the giraffes at a distance, his shadow a protective veil, while Amina trailed in the vehicle, monitoring from afar. By midday, the family had reached a sheltered grove, acacias forming a natural canopy where Lila could rest. Ruto nursed again, stronger now, his eyes blinking open to the world's vastness. Mira stood sentry, her youthful energy undimmed, while Lila's breaths evened out, the crisis ebbing like the river's tide. Yet as the afternoon heat peaked, a new concern arose. Ruto's movements grew lethargic, his attempts to stand faltering more than before. Amina arrived with a sample kit, darting close enough for a quick swab, non-invasive, guided by the giraffe's distraction with fresh browse. Back at the outpost, tests revealed mild dehydration, a remnant of the bog's toll on Lila's system. "He'll pull through," Amina assured the team, mixing a nutrient supplement to administer via a long-reach syringe. The intervention was gentle, the calf accepting the fluid with a puzzled lick, his resilience shining through. In the grove, the family settled into a fragile peace. Lila licked Ruto clean once more, her tongue rasping away the dust of their journey, while Mira grazed nearby, her bleats now songs of contentment. Quito browsed at the edge, his presence a silent guardian, the savannah's unlikely hero. The sun dipped toward evening, casting long shadows that danced with promise and peril. Survival here was a daily miracle, woven from bonds that defied the wild's indifference, the mother's love, the sister's vigilance, the elephant's mercy, and the human's watchful care. As stars began to emerge, the Mara whispered of tomorrows yet to unfold, each one a test in the endless rhythm of life. The evening shadows lengthened across the sheltered grove, turning the acacia leaves into silhouettes etched against the fading sky. Lila stood sentinel over her young, her neck curved protectively as Ruto dozed against her flank, his tiny chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms. The nutrient supplement from Dr. Amina had steadied him, but his lethargy lingered like a stubborn fog, his legs folding beneath him more often than not when he tried to rise. Mira grazed nearby, her jaws working methodically on the thorny branches, but her eyes never strayed far from her brother, flicking toward every snap of twig or rustle in the underbrush. The air cooled with the descent of dusk, carrying the sharp tang of river mist and the distant acrid smoke from the outpost's cookfires. Quito had not wandered far, his massive form a hulking presence at the grove's edge, where he uprooted a small shrub with his trunk and savored it slowly. The bull-elephant scars caught the last glimmers of light, reminders of battles won and lost in the Mara's unforgiving expanse. He'd seen families fracture under lesser strains, calves lost to fever or forgotten in migrations, but this one tugged at him, an echo of his own solitary path after the herd's dispersal years ago. A low rumble emanated from his throat, a subsonic vibration that rippled through the ground, soothing the giraffes without demand. Lila acknowledged it with a slight tilt of her head, her ears relaxing fractionally for the first time since the bog. From the outpost, the rangers maintained their vigil. Elias drove the jeep in slow loops around the perimeter, its engine a muted growl that blended with the night's chorus of crickets and hyena whoops. Juma manned the motion sensors, their faint beeps punctuating the quiet as he logged data by lantern light. "The calf's holding," he reported over the radio to Amina, who was back at the clinic preparing a follow-up dose. Her voice crackled through, steady but laced with fatigue. "Keep the area clear of scavengers. If he doesn't strengthen by morning, we'll need to isolate them for treatment." The words hung heavy. Isolation meant corrals and fences, a human imposition on the wild that could shatter the family's fragile trust. As twilight deepened into full night, Ruto stirred, his bleats weak but insistent as hunger pulled him from sleep. Lila lowered her head, guiding him to nurse once more, the warmth of her body a shield against the chill seeping from the river. Mira joined them, her own feeding a ritual of reassurance, her tongue flicking out to clean flecks of mud from Ruto's coat. The siblings' proximity was a quiet miracle in itself. Ruto's eyes, still hazy with newborn blur, fixed on his sister's form, imprinting her as kin in those first. Vital hours, but Lila sensed the imbalance. Her milk, though abundant, carried the taint of her exhaustion, thinner than it should be after the quicksand's drain. She stamped a hoof softly, frustration bubbling in a muffled snort. The savannah stirred with nocturnal life. A troop of bush babies chattered from the branches overhead, their eyes glowing like embers in the ranger's sweeps. Farther out, the hyenas' calls grew bolder, circling the grove in probing sweeps, their shadows slinking through the grass like liquid night. Quito rose to meet them, his trumpet a sharp rebuke that sent them scattering with yips of protest. The elephant's intervention bought time, but Lila knew the predator's patience was endless. The afterbirth scent, though masked, lingered faintly, a beacon in the dark. She urged her young deeper into the thicket, her strides careful to accommodate Ruto's faltering steps, Mira herding from behind with gentle nudges. Elias spotted the hyenas first, their forms caught in the jeep's headlights as he patrolled. "They're testing us," he muttered into the radio, accelerating to flank them. The animals veered away, but not before one bold female paused. Her ears pricked toward the giraffe's soft movements. Juma fired a salt round from the vehicle, a non-lethal pop that exploded with noise and sting, driving the pack into retreat. The rangers exchanged glances, the adrenaline sharpening their resolve. "Can't keep this up all night," Elias said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "Amina's coming at first light with the dart gun, just in case." In the grove, Lila settled her family beneath a canopy of intertwined branches, the leaves forming a natural roof that filtered the starlight into silver flecks. Ruto collapsed beside her, his body curling instinctively against her warmth, while Mira lay across from him, her long neck draped protectively. The mother's heart ached with a fierce tenderness, memories of Mira's own birth flashing through her mind, uncomplicated, under a full moon with the herd's distant calls as chorus. This one felt stolen, wrested from the jaws of the bog, and now guarded by strangers and a lone giant. She licked Ruto's forehead, tasting the salt of his skin, willing her strength into him through that simple act. Quito circled the perimeter once, his trunk dragging along the ground to leave a trail of scent that marked the area as claimed. Elephants were architects of memory, their paths etched into the land, and tonight he added this grove to his map, a sanctuary born of chance. A distant lion's roar rolled across the plains, answered by the river's murmur, but the grove held its peace, a bubble of calm amid the wild's ceaseless churn. Mira's breaths evened out first, her exhaustion claiming her in sleep, but Lila remained awake, ears swiveling at every whisper of wind. Dawn approached stealthily, the eastern sky blushing with the promise of another scorching day. Ruto woke with a start, his bleat piercing the quiet as he struggled to his feet. This time his legs held longer, a tentative wobble toward the open grass where dew-kissed shoots beckoned. Leela watched, hope flickering in her chest like the first light. Mira roused, joining him in exploration, their heads bumping in playful correction as he veered too close to a thorn. The siblings' bond blossomed in these small moments, a foundation against the savannah's trials. Amina's jeep arrived with the sunrise, the doctor emerging with a kit of supplements and a long syringe disguised as a branch to minimize stress. She approached on foot, Elias covering her with the vehicle idling nearby. "He's moving better," she observed softly, kneeling to assess from afar. Lila tensed at the intrusion, her neck arching warningly, but the promise of food, fresh acacia bundles from the outpost, drew her forward. Ruto, oblivious to the humans, nosed at a low leaf, his appetite sharpening as the supplement took hold. Amina administered the dose during a distraction, the needle's prick lost in the rustle of feeding. Quito trumpeted in approval from the tree line, his form retreating as the sun climbed, content that his watch could ease. The rangers withdrew too, leaving the family to the morning's rhythm, but patrols would continue, unseen guardians in the vastness. Lila grazed alongside her young, the grove's safety a temporary grace, but the Mara demanded movement soon. Stagnation invited peril. As Ruto took his first unaided steps toward the river, Mira at his side, Lila followed, her steps surer now. The miracle of survival unfolded step by step, a tapestry of resilience woven from the night's shadows into the day's light. Yet whispers of greater challenges stirred on the horizon. Droughts creep, poachers' shadows, tests that would forge this family in the fire of the wild. The savannah watched, eternal and impartial, as life pressed onward. The days blurred into a relentless haze over the Masai Mara, the sun beating down like a forge hammer on the parched earth. What had once been a vibrant tapestry of golden grasslands now cracked underfoot, the acacia leaves wilting into brittle curls that offered scant nourishment. Lila led her small family through the thinning scrub, her neck stretching desperately toward the highest branches, but even those yielded little more than dust-coated thorns. Ruto, now a week into his fragile existence, trailed behind, with Mira's constant encouragement, his legs gaining strength, but his steps still tentative, like a sapling bending in the wind. The calf's coat, once glossy with newborn vitality, dulled under the relentless exposure, his ribs faintly visible with each labored breath. Mira had taken to her role as sister with fierce devotion, nuzzling Ruto when he faltered and bleating sharply to spur him onward. Her own energy flagged, though, the drought's grip tightened like a noose, rivers shrinking to muddy trickles that barely quenched their thirst. Lila's milk had dwindled, a thin stream that left Ruto unsatisfied, his whimpers echoing through the nights like accusations against the unforgiving sky. The mother giraffe's eyes, once bright with maternal certainty, now carried the shadow of worry, scanning the horizon for signs of rain that never came. Quito had vanished into the bush days earlier, his solitary path diverging as elephants often did, but his absence left a void, a reminder that alliances in the wild were fleeting, forged in crisis, but tested by endurance. The family skirted the edges of the riverbed, now a skeletal scar through the landscape, its banks littered with the bones of fish and the desiccated husks of stranded hippos. Lila paused to dig at a damp patch with her hoof, unearthing a shallow puddle that she slurped greedily before guiding her young to it. Ruto dipped his muzzle in, the water murky and warm, flecked with the grit of evaporated silt. Mira stood guard, her ears swiveling at the distant crackle of dry grass, where a herd of zebras shuffled past, their hides gaunt and eyes hollow. The savannah's symphony had quieted. Birdsong gave way to the harsh cries of vultures circling overhead. omens of the toll this dry spell exacted. Farther afield, the rangers at the outpost felt the strain deepen. Dr. Hermine Gerogier pored over satellite maps in the dim light of the clinic, her brow furrowed as red zones marked the spreading drought. Patrols had doubled, jeeps kicking up dust clouds that choked the air, but resources stretched thin. Water for the station rationed, fuel for the vehicles conserved. Elias drove the perimeter that afternoon, his eyes burning from the glare, radio static his only companion. HQ, this is Elias, spotted the Giraffe family near the old crossing. Calves looking weak, they're heading west toward the escarpment. The response crackled back. Limited support, focus on the main herds. Poacher sightings had spiked too. Whispers of snares and rifles drawn by the desperation that made animals predictable. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised oranges, Lila crested a rise overlooking a dried pan, a vast cracked basin where water once gathered during the rains. Hope flickered briefly. Perhaps a hidden spring lingered beneath. She urged Mira and Ruto down the slope, their hooves crunching the fissured clay like shattered pottery. But the ground betrayed them again, not with Quicksand's suck, but with deceptive firmness that gave way to ankle-deep dust. Ruto stumbled, his front legs buckling into a soft sinkhole of loose soil, a mini-trap formed by the drought's erosion. He bleated in panic, thrashing as the earth clawed at him, Mira rushing to his side with frantic nudges. Lila whirled, her heart pounding like war drums, and lowered her head to push against her son's flank. The effort strained her weakened frame, muscles aching from days of sparse grazing, but maternal fire ignited her resolve. She dug her hooves in, leveraging her weight to haul him free, the dust billowing around them in choking clouds. Ruto emerged coughing, coated head to toe in fine powder, his eyes wide with the terror of entrapment so soon after his birth. Mira licked the grit from his face, her tongue rasping gently, while Lila stood over them both, neck arched in vigilant sweep. The pan offered no respite, only exhaustion, and the family retreated to higher ground, the incident a stark reminder of the land's shifting perils. Night fell heavy, stars mocking the barren earth with their cold glitter. Lila curled around her young in a shallow depression ringed by thorn bushes, the sparse cover their only defense. Ruto's breaths came in wheezes, the dust irritating his tender lungs, and he nursed fitfully, drawing little comfort. Mira pressed against him, her warmth a shared bulwark against the chill, but sleep eluded the trio. Distant whoops of hyenas pierced the dark, closer now, drawn by the scent of vulnerability. Lila's ears pinned back, her body tensing as shadows slunk at the periphery, scavengers emboldened by the drought's famine. In the outpost, Juma monitored the sensors, a blip alerting him to movement near the pan. "Elias, get out there! Hyenas on the giraffe's trail!" The jeep roared to life, headlights slicing the night as Elias sped toward the coordinates. He arrived just as the pack closed in, 5 gaunt figures with ribs like washboards, eyes gleaming with hunger. A warning shot cracked the air, scattering them into the brush with yelps of frustration. Lila startled at the noise, rising to shield her family, but recognition dawned. These humans had been allies before. Elias kept his distance, engine idling, a beacon in the gloom until the hyenas retreated fully. By morning, the family pressed on, drawn by instinct toward the escarpment where rumors of a spring persisted among the migrating herds. Lila's steps faltered more often, her pregnancy's toll compounded by starvation, but she pushed forward, Ruto's survival her anchor. Mira scouted ahead, her youthful curiosity now tempered by purpose, spotting a cluster of fever trees with slightly greener leaves, a sign of moisture below. They grazed what they could, the bitter bark scraping their throats, but it sustained them barely. As midday heat shimmered the air, a new threat materialized, the faint whine of an engine, not the ranger's familiar rumble, but something stealthier, Slicing through the acacias from the north. Poachers, Elias would later confirm over radio. Ivory hunters turned opportunists, their drought-ravaged routes pushing them deeper into the reserve. Gunshots echoed distantly, not at the giraffes, but at a fleeing elephant herd, the blasts of thunder that sent birds erupting from the trees. Lila froze, her neck craning skyward, the sound igniting primal fear. Ruto huddled against her, trembling, while Mira bleated in confusion, the innocence of her world fracturing further. The family veered sharply, plunging into denser bush to evade the chaos, thorns raking their hides as they crashed through. Lila's flank bled from a deep scratch, the sting ignored in the flight, but Ruto lagged, his weakened state turning every stride into torment. Mira doubled back, urging him with desperate pushes, her own legs quivering from the effort. The poacher's vehicle passed perilously close, its occupants scanning for trophies, unaware of the giraffes in the undergrowth. Heartbeats thundered in unison as the engine faded, leaving only the echo of danger. They emerged hours later, battered but intact, collapsing in a hidden gully where a trickle of water seeped from the rock. Lila lapped at it gratefully, then tended to Ruto, cleaning his wounds with careful licks. The calf's eyes met hers, a spark of resilience amid the fatigue. And for a moment, peace settled, a fragile interlude in the storm. Mira stood watch, her silhouette etched against the westering sun, the savannah's injustices piling like the dust on their coats. Survival demanded more than miracles. It required the unyielding thread of family, woven tighter with each trial. As evening descended, the distant ranger patrols hummed like guardian spirits. But the wild's heart remained untamed, pulsing with threats yet to unfold. The gully's shadows deepened as the sun slipped below the escarpment, casting the rocky walls in hues of bruised purple and indigo. Lila pressed her flank against the cool stone, her breath steadying after the frantic dash from the poacher's gunfire. The trickle of water beside them was a meager lifeline, seeping from a fissure in the red earth like a reluctant tear, but it was enough to wash the dust from their throats. Ruto lay curled at her side, his small body rising and falling in shallow rhythms, the scratches from the thorns faint lines across his hide that she'd already soothed with her tongue. Mira paced the narrow confines, her long legs folding awkwardly in the tight space, ears straining for any echo of engines or predatory yips. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp rock and wilted vegetation, a stark contrast to the open savannah's vast, arid breath. Lila's mind replayed the day's perils in fragmented flashes, the poacher's distant shots, the thunderous retreat through the thorns, Ruto's faltering steps that had nearly cost them everything. Her own wounds throbbed, a deep gash on her flank weeping a thin trail of blood that attracted ants in the fading light. She stamped them away with a weary hoof, her neck curving to nuzzle Ruto awake for another feeding. The calf stirred, his muzzle questing blindly before latching on, but the milk came in weak spurts, her reserves depleted by the drought's merciless hold. Mira joined them, her own hunger a quiet gnaw, but she yielded the nourishment to her brother, contenting herself with a few brittle shoots protruding from the gully's cracks. The family's silence was broken only by the soft suckling and the occasional drip of water echoing off the walls, a fragile sanctuary in a world unraveling at the seams. High above, on the escarpment's rim, Elias gripped the jeep's steering wheel, his knuckles white against the worn leather. The patrol had veered off course after the poacher alert, dust devils swirling in their wake as they crested the rise. Juma scanned the horizon through binoculars, the lenses fogging slightly from the heat radiating off the dashboard. Tracks head this way, fresh, giraffe prints mixed with the dust, and those bastards' tires cut right through. Elias cursed under his breath, the radio hissing with Amina's voice from the outpost. Stay on them, but don't engage alone. Backups en route from the northern post. The rangers knew the poachers' patterns, Seasoned traffickers from the borderlands, driven inland by the dry spell, their snares claiming more than just elephants now. Giraffes, with their hides prized for bushmeat and bones for trinkets, were easy targets in this desperation. As night cloaked the gully, the hyenas returned, their whoops slithering down the slopes like smoke. Lila rose abruptly, her silhouette towering in the dimness, a low bellow rumbling from her chest to ward them off. Mira flanked Ruto, her bleats sharp and defiant, while the calf huddled low, his wide eyes reflecting the scant moonlight filtering through the overhung branches. The pack circled above, shadows merging with the rocks, their gaunt forms emboldened by the isolation. One bold female edged closer, her spotted coat blending with the terrain, jaws parting in a yellow-toothed grin. Lila charged the rim with surprising ferocity, her hooves dislodging pebbles in a rattling cascade that sent the hyena skittering back. But the effort cost her. She staggered on the return, her injured flank pulsing with fresh pain, forcing her to lean against the wall for support. Mira's instincts surged, her young frame pushing forward to stand beside her mother, neck arched in mimicry of Lila's stance. The siblings' bond, forged in the bog's shadow and the labor's triumph, now faced its sternest test. Ruto attempted to rise, his legs trembling as he pressed against Mira's side, a tiny echo of their unity. The hyenas pressed their advantage, two more slipping down the slope, their eyes locked on the vulnerable calf. Lila summoned her strength for another warning charge, but weakness betrayed her. A misstep on loose gravel sent her sliding, her body wedged briefly against a boulder. Panic flared in her eyes as the predators closed in, yips turning to eager growls. The jeep's headlights pierced the darkness like vengeful spears, Elias gunning the engine to roar down the escarpment's flank. The beams caught the hyenas mid-prowl, their forms scattering in a frenzy of dust and snarls. Juma leaned out, firing a flare that arced overhead in a blazing red trail, illuminating the gully in stark relief. Lila froze in the glare, her protective stance unwavering even as relief washed through her. The rangers halted at the rim, engines idling as they assessed the scene, no poachers in sight, but the giraffe's plight etched in every tense line of their bodies. "They're trapped down there," Elias radioed, his voice tight. "Calves exposed. We need to clear the hyenas and get them out." Amina arrived minutes later in a second vehicle, her medical kit bouncing on the seat beside her. The team worked swiftly, salt rounds popping into the night to drive the scavengers fully away, their howls fading into resentful echoes. With ropes and branches from the jeep's stores, they fashioned a ramp down the steeper sections, guiding it carefully to avoid spooking the family. Lila eyed the humans warily, her ears flicking back, but the promise of safety overrode her caution. She nudged Ruto and Mira forward, the calf's steps halting but determined as they ascended the improvised path. Mira led the way, turning to encourage her brother with soft bleats, while Lila brought up the rear, her injured gait slowing their progress. At the top, the rangers formed a loose cordon, flashlights dimmed to soft glows that herded the giraffes toward an open flat nearby, away from the gully's perils. Amina approached with measured steps, her voice a soothing murmur as she examined Lila from afar. The gash needed cleaning, antibiotics to stave off infection in this dust-choked air. "She's fighting hard," Amina said to Elias, handing him a long-reach applicator loaded with antiseptic. "The calf too, dehydration's hitting them all." They administered aid discreetly. Fruits and nutrient-laced water placed in shallow depressions that the animals lapped at gratefully. Ruto's energy flickered back, his muzzle dipping into the offering with eager laps, while Mira stood guard, her vigilance a mirror of Lila's. As the moon climbed, the family settled under a lone acacia, its sparse canopy a frail umbrella against the stars. The rangers withdrew to a watchful distance, jeeps parked in a semicircle, with radios tuned to the poachers' chatter intercepted from border scans. Juma sketched the night's events in the logbook, his pen scratching faintly. Giraffe family extracted from gully. Hyena deterrent successful. Poacher threat escalating. Recommend aerial surveillance. Elias scanned the dark. The savannah's silence deceptive, broken only by the giraffe's contented rumbles. Lila licked her young clean, the ritual a balm. Her wounds bandaged lightly with natural dressings from Amina's kit. Aloe strips from nearby plants to draw out the heat. Dawn broke with a vengeance, the sun igniting the escarpment in fiery gold, but the air held a whisper of change, a distant rumble on the wind. Not thunder, but the faint patter of scattered drops far to the east. Lila rose first, testing her leg, the pain dulled to a manageable ache. Ruto followed, his steps surer, nuzzling Mira in a burst of morning play that drew soft bleats from the trio. The family moved toward the open plain, drawn by the promise of grazing lands beyond the drought's worst grip. The rangers' jeeps trailing at a respectful remove. Poacher tracks scarred the earth, but the night's rescue had bought them time, a thread of hope in the unraveling wild. Yet, as they crested the next rise, a new silhouette loomed on the horizon. A lone bull elephant, trunk raised in greeting, his form unmistakable even in the haze. Quito had returned. Drawn by the same instincts that bound the savannah's souls, his presence, a guardian, renewed. Lila paused, her neck arching in acknowledgement, while Ruto and Mira gazed in wonder. The miracle of the bog echoed forward, alliances reforming against the gathering storms. The rains teased at the edges of the sky, and with them the possibility of renewal. But the poacher's shadows lingered, a final trial waiting in the dust-choked distance. The Mara held its breath, the family's steps, a defiant rhythm toward whatever dawn awaited. The morning sun climbed relentlessly over the escarpment, its rays piercing the thin veil of clouds that had gathered like hesitant spectators on the horizon. Lila led the way across the open plain, her strides measured to accommodate Ruto's improving gait. The calf now bounding in short bursts beside Mira, his energy renewed by the night's rest and the faint moisture in the air. The gully's ordeal felt like a distant echo, though the scar on Lila's flank pulled with each step, a dull reminder of the savannah's unyielding tests. Mira flanked her brother, her neck bumping his playfully when he veered too close to a cluster of sun-baked termite mounds, her bleats light and encouraging, a far cry from the frantic cries that had pierced the bog's night weeks ago. Quito lumbered alongside them, his massive shadow stretching long across the cracked earth, trunk swaying in rhythmic arcs as he uprooted occasional tufts of dry grass. The bull elephant's return had been unspoken, a convergence of paths drawn by the invisible threads of the wild, scent trails, remembered rumbles, the pull of unfinished kinship. He'd crossed their route at dawn, his scarred forehead catching the light as he trumpeted a low welcome, and Lila had responded with a subtle dip of her head, the gesture sealing their transient alliance once more. Ruto paused to stare at the giant, his wide eyes unblinking, while Mira circled curiously, her ossicones quivering with a mix of awe and wariness. In Quito's presence, the plain felt less vast, less hostile, a momentary bulwark against the drought's lingering bite. From the ridge above, Elias gripped the binoculars, the jeep's engine ticking cool in the shade of a lone sausage tree. Juma sat beside him, radio pressed to his ear, the static giving way to Amina's clipped update. Poacher convoy spotted near the border fence. 3 vehicles, armed. They're pushing south, likely after the weakened herds. Elias lowered the lenses, his jaw tightening. The giraffe's path would intersect those routes if the rains didn't break soon. The escarpment funneled migrations into bottlenecks, ripe for ambush. We tailed them quietly, he said, shifting into gear. Alert the aerial team. Drone overwatch if we can spare the battery. The Rangers had become shadows in the family's story, their interventions a delicate dance to preserve the wild's autonomy while staving off human greed. As the group crested another low rise, the air thickened with promise. A cool gust swept across the plain, carrying the faint, metallic scent of impending rain, ozone and wet earth stirring from dormancy. Lila lifted her head, nostrils flaring, her ears pivoting toward the east, where dark clouds massed like an army on the march. Ruto sensed it too, his steps quickening as he nipped at Mira's tail. The siblings' play infused with a spark of vitality. Quito trumpeted sharply, the sound vibrating through the ground, scattering a flock of helmeted guinea fowl into frantic flight. The first drops fell sporadically, fat and warm, splattering the dust into dark blooms that released a rich, loamy aroma long absent from the parched land. The rain intensified as they descended into a shallow basin, sheets of water transforming the cracked soil into a slick mosaic. Lila paused under a spreading acacia, her coat darkening as rivulets traced her spots, washing away the grime of weeks. Ruto splashed in a burgeoning puddle, his legs kicking up mud in joyful arcs, while Mira joined him, their bleats rising in a chorus of relief. The water soaked through to Lila's skin, easing the ache in her wounds and replenishing her weary frame. She lowered her muzzle to a growing pool, drinking deeply, the liquid cool and pure against her tongue. For the first time since the bog, a profound calm settled over her, the cycle turning, life asserting itself against the brink. But the savannah's reprieve was never absolute. From the north, the whine of engines cut through the downpour, tires churning mud as the poachers' convoy barreled into view, their silhouettes blurred by the sheets of rain. They'd been tracking the herds, drawn by the same reins that promised renewal, but also concentrated the desperate animals into kill zones. Shots rang out sporadically, muffled by the storm, aimed at straggling zebras that bolted past the giraffe's position. Lila tensed, her neck arching as she herded Ruto and Mira deeper into the acacia's cover, Quito positioning his bulk between them and the threat, tusks gleaming wetly as he let out a thunderous bellow that shook the branches. Elias floored the accelerator, the jeep fishtailing through the mud as he closed the gap. "Visual on targets, 3 trucks, engaging now," he barked into the radio. Juma fired a flare from the passenger window, its red glow streaking through the grey to signal their approach. The poachers swerved, headlights sweeping wildly, but the Rangers were upon them, blocking the lead vehicle with a controlled skid. Backup arrived in a roar of engines, 2 more jeeps from the northern post, Rangers leaping out with rifles raised, not to kill but to disarm. "Halt! Kenya Wildlife Service!" Elias shouted over the din, his voice carrying authority honed from years on these plains. The poachers, caught off guard by the storm and the swift response, raised hands in surrender, their weapons clattering to the mud as zip ties secured them. Amina arrived shortly after, her vehicle splashing through the basin to check on the giraffes. The rain had masked the commotion, and Lila watched from the thicket's edge. Her family huddled close. Ruto nursed contentedly, oblivious to the chaos resolved mere yards away, while Mira grazed the rain-freshened shoots sprouting almost before their eyes. Quito stood unmoved, trunk raised in quiet triumph, the storm's fury now a gentle patter that drummed a lullaby on the leaves. The poachers were loaded into custody, their snares and rifles confiscated, the reserve's borders a step safer for the turning season. As the clouds parted, sunlight fracturing through to paint rainbows across the plain, Lila led her family onward, the basin alive with the trickle of new streams carving paths through the earth. Ruto's steps were bold now, his coat gleaming, Mira at his side in sisterly stride. Quito trailed for a time, then veered toward the horizon, his path diverging once more into the vastness. The drought's grip had broken, the bog's shadow faded, and the miracles of rescue, birth, alliance wove into the fabric of survival. The Masai Mara breathed anew, its rhythms restored, the giraffe family's bond an enduring thread in the wild's eternal tapestry. Leave a comment sharing what you thought about this story.